Welcome to Fated Hearts, your destination for captivating paranormal romance audiobooks that will sweep you off your feet and into worlds where love knows no boundaries. I'm thrilled you've joined me today for an unforgettable journey. In today's full-length audiobook, we're diving deep into the passionate and supernatural world of Tanya and Nicholas, a story of betrayal, discovery, and the undeniable pull of fated love. This is a tale that begins with heartbreak, a woman betrayed by those she trusted most, and transforms into something magical as Tanya discovers not only her own hidden supernatural heritage, but also the mysterious werewolf Alpha who gave her the greatest gift of all, their son. From fae royalty to werewolf pack dynamics, from single motherhood to supernatural awakening, this story has everything paranormal romance lovers crave: powerful alphas, mystical abilities, jealous rivals, and a love that transcends the ordinary world. If you're ready to lose yourself in this enchanting tale, please hit that like button, subscribe to Fated Hearts for more magical romance audiobooks, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new release. Content note: this audiobook contains mature themes, supernatural elements, and adult relationships suitable for listeners 18 and older. Now, settle in with your favorite cozy spot, grab a warm drink, and let me transport you to a world where betrayal leads to destiny, and where true love is indeed fated. Let's begin our journey together. They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. What they don't tell you is that sometimes, the worst day of your life happens at your engagement party. My name is Tanya, and 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 22, madly in love, and about to marry my college sweetheart in what I believed would be a fairy tale ending. I was wrong about everything. Especially about being human. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that night, the night that destroyed my perfect life and set me on a path I never could have imagined. The ballroom at the Grandview Hotel looked like something out of a magazine. Fairy lights twinkled from every surface, white roses cascaded down the walls, and champagne flowed like water. My mother had outdone herself. This party was her masterpiece, and I was her perfect princess. I smoothed my white cocktail dress for the 100th time, watching our families mingle. David's parents were laughing with mine by the gift table, our college friends clustered around the bar, and everything was exactly as I dreamed. "You look nervous," my best friend Sarah whispered, appearing at my elbow with 2 champagne flutes. "This is your night, I'll enjoy it." I took the glass gratefully, the bubbles tickling my nose. "I'm not nervous, I am overwhelmed. Look at all this." I gestured around the room. "In 6 months, I'll be Mrs. David Harrison. Can you believe it?" Sarah's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly I almost missed it. "It's like a fairy tale," she said, but something in her voice sounded off. I was about to ask her about it when David appeared, looking devastatingly handsome in his navy suit. His arms slipped around my waist from behind, and I melted into his familiar warmth. "There's my beautiful fiancé," he murmured against my ear, making me shiver. "Ready for our big moment?" The crowd was gathering, champagne glasses raised expectantly. David's father was tapping his glass with a knife, calling for attention. This was it, the official announcement, the toast, the moment that would make our engagement real to everyone who mattered. But as David stepped forward to address our guests, I caught Sarah's expression in my peripheral vision. She looked guilty. No, more than guilty. She looked terrified. A cold finger of unease traced down my spine, but I pushed it away. This was my perfect night. Nothing could ruin it. I had no idea that in less than an hour, my perfect world would shatter into a million pieces. David's speech was everything I'd hoped for. Charming, romantic, full of promises about our future together. The crowd laughed at his jokes. "Aw," Deet at his declarations of love, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive. But halfway through his toast, I realized I needed the bathroom. Too much champagne and pre-party nerves. I slipped away quietly, not wanting to interrupt his moment. The ladies' room was occupied, so I headed upstairs to the private bathroom near the bridal suite, the one we'd used earlier when I was getting ready. The hallway was dimly lit, romantic music drifting up from below, and I felt like I was floating on clouds. That feeling lasted exactly 30 seconds. As I approached the bathroom, I heard voices coming from the bridal suite. The door was slightly ajar, and something about the hushed, urgent tones made me pause. I recognized David's voice first. "This is insane, Sarah. We can't keep doing this." My blood turned to ice. "Sarah? My Sarah?" I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering so loud I was sure they'd hear it. "I know," came Sarah's voice, breathless and intimate. "But I can't help it. I've been in love with you since college, David. You know that." The world tilted sideways. This couldn't be happening. Not tonight. Not ever. Tanya's downstairs giving a speech about our future. David's voice was strained. "Our wedding is in 6 months. Then why are you here with me?" Sarah's voice was closer now. "Why have you been here with me for the past 8 months? 8 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. 8 months they'd been, what? I had to know. I had to see. I crept closer to the crack in the door, my engagement ring catching the light from the hallway sconces. Through the gap, I could see them. Sarah, my maid of honor, my best friend since freshman year, was pressed against the wall. And David, my David, the man who'd proposed to me on a beach at sunset just 3 months ago, was kissing her like his life depended on it. His hands were in her hair. Her legs were wrapped around his waist. And they were. God, they were tearing at each other's clothes like they'd done this 1,000 times before. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because David's head snapped up. Our eyes met through the crack in the door, and I watched his face drain of all color. Tanya. My name fell from his lips like a curse. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran. Footsteps running, doors slamming, muffled party sounds growing distant. I burst through the stairwell doors and kept running, my heels clicking frantically on the marble floors. Behind me, I could hear David calling my name, his footsteps pursuing me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The party was still in full swing when I reached the ballroom. Everyone was laughing, dancing, celebrating the love that had just been revealed as a complete lie. My mother was showing off my engagement photos to anyone who would look. David's mother was gushing about wedding venues. They all looked so happy. So blissfully unaware that the guest of honor's world had just imploded. Tanya. David caught up to me near the coat check, grabbing my arm. His hair was mussed, his tie askew. Guilt was written across every feature. Tanya, wait. Let me explain. I spun around to face him, and the entire party seemed to pause. Conversations faltered. Music seemed to lower. Everyone was watching now, sensing drama but not understanding it. Explain what? My voice was surprisingly steady. Explain how long you've been sleeping with my best friend? Because I heard that part. 8 months, David. 8 months. The gasps from our families and friends were audible now. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. It's not what you think, David started, but I cut him off. It's exactly what I think. I looked around at all the shocked faces, all the people who'd come to celebrate our love. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to announce that the engagement is off. Permanently. I slipped my ring off my finger, the ring that had felt so perfect just an hour ago, and pressed it into David's palm. Tanya, please, he tried again, but I was already walking away. The party's over, I called over my shoulder. But please, enjoy the champagne. It's expensive. I walked out of that hotel and into the night, with no idea that the real story of my life was about to begin. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, mile after mile of asphalt that led away from everything I thought I wanted. My car was packed with the essentials, clothes, important documents, my laptop, and the savings account David never knew about. Thank God for that account. When I opened it 2 years ago, it was supposed to be for wedding expenses. Now it was my lifeline to independence. I drove without a destination, just knowing I needed distance. Physical distance from David and Sarah's betrayal, emotional distance from the life I'd built around people who never deserved my trust. The radio played softly, filling the silence with songs that didn't remind me of anyone or anything from back home. My phone rang constantly for the first few hours. David, Sarah, my adoptive parents, even my old boss. I finally turned it off somewhere outside the city limits and focused on the road ahead. When I reached Portland 12 hours later, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way the city felt both vibrant and calm, or how the mountains in the distance promised adventures I'd never considered. As I drove through the downtown area, past coffee shops and bookstores and people who didn't know my story, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: possibility. I pulled into a decent hotel downtown and decided to stay the night. One night turned into 3 as I explored the neighborhoods, getting a feel for the place. By the 4th day, I knew I wasn't leaving. Portland, my mother, Carol, said when I finally called them back. "Honey, that's so far from us. Are you sure about this?" "I need a fresh start, Mom," I told her, sitting in the hotel's lobby with a cup of coffee that was better than anything we'd had back home. "I can't stay there anymore." "We understand, sweetheart," my father, Jim, said on the extension. "David called here looking for you. We told him we didn't know where you were." "Thank you." The relief in my voice was obvious. "I'm not ready to talk to him. I don't know if I ever will be." "Take all the time you need," Carol said. "But promise me you'll be careful. And call us every few days so we know you're okay." I promised, grateful once again for the parents who'd raised me with such love and support. They'd adopted me when I was 6 months old, and I'd never questioned their devotion. Even now, when I was making what probably seemed like an impulsive decision, they trusted me to know what was best for my life. Finding an apartment happened faster than I'd expected. The real estate agent, a friendly woman named Janet, showed me 3 places in the Pearl District before we found the perfect one, a 1-bedroom with huge windows and a view of the river. It was more expensive than I'd planned, but my savings could handle the deposit and first few months while I found work. "You're lucky," Janet said as we signed the paperwork. "The previous tenant left early, so it's available immediately. Most places have waiting lists." I moved in the next day with the few belongings I'd brought, and a mattress delivered from a local store. The apartment felt enormous after sharing space with David for 2 years. I walked from room to room, amazed by the silence and the freedom to arrange everything exactly how I wanted it. Job hunting was more challenging, but my marketing degree and experience at the consulting firm back home opened doors. I had interviews lined up within a week, and by the end of my 2nd week in Portland, I had an offer from a mid-sized marketing agency that specialized in outdoor recreation companies. "We love your background," the hiring manager, Ross, told me during my final interview. "Your portfolio shows exactly the kind of creative thinking we need for our adventure sports clients." The job came with a decent salary, full benefits, and the kind of collaborative environment I'd always wanted. When I walked out of that building with a start date set for the following Monday, I felt more accomplished than I had in months. My first day at Cascade Marketing was everything I'd hoped for. The office was in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and huge windows that let in natural light. My new colleagues were friendly without being intrusive, and the work itself was challenging and creative. "We're working on a campaign for a new climbing gear company," my supervisor, Beth, explained as she showed me to my desk. "They want something that appeals to both serious climbers and weekend warriors. Right up your alley, from what I saw in your interview." I threw myself into the work, grateful for the distraction and the chance to prove myself in a new environment. The project required research into Portland's outdoor recreation scene, which gave me an excuse to explore the city even more. I visited climbing gyms, hiking gear stores, and coffee shops where athletes plan their next adventures. Evenings were the hardest time. Without the busy energy of learning a new job and exploring a new city, thoughts of that night with Nicholas would creep in. I'd remember the intensity in his eyes, the way he'd listened when I told him about the engagement party disaster, how safe I'd felt in his hotel room even though I barely knew him. Sometimes I wondered if I should have left my number or asked for his. But the anonymity had been part of what made that night so freeing. Nicholas, I didn't even know his last name, represented a version of myself I was just beginning to discover. Someone who could make bold choices, who could take what she wanted without apologizing for it. 3 weeks into my new life, I'd established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Morning runs along the river, coffee at the place downstairs from my office, work that actually excited me, and evenings spent reading or exploring different neighborhoods. I'd even started making friends. Beth had invited me to a happy hour with the team, and my upstairs neighbor, Amy, had knocked on my door with fresh cookies and an offer to show me the best brunch spots in the city. "You're settling in well," Amy observed as we walked to our favorite coffee shop on a Saturday morning. "Most people take months to look as comfortable as you do." "It feels right here," I told her, and meant it. "Like I can be whoever I want to be." "That's the Portland magic," she laughed. "This city has a way of letting people reinvent themselves." But as we walked back to our building, I noticed something odd. The smell of coffee that usually made me crave a second cup was suddenly overwhelming, almost nauseating. I chalked it up to having already had 2 cups that morning, but the feeling lingered even after we said goodbye, and I went back to my apartment. The next morning, the same thing happened with my usual breakfast. Toast that normally tasted perfectly fine seemed bland and unappealing, while the smell of eggs cooking in the apartment next door made my stomach turn. I shrugged it off as stress or maybe the beginning of a cold. After everything that had happened in the past month, the betrayal, the move, starting a new job, it made sense that my body might be catching up with the emotional upheaval. But as I got ready for work that Monday, 3 weeks and 2 days after I'd driven away from my old life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Not wrong, exactly, but changed. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, trying to pinpoint what seemed off, but couldn't identify anything specific. Maybe it was just the natural result of the new independence I was building. For the first time in my adult life, every decision was entirely my own. Where to live, what to eat, how to spend my evenings, which projects to tackle at work, it was all up to me. Perhaps this strange feeling was simply what freedom felt like after years of compromise and accommodation. I grabbed my coffee, which still smelled too strong but tasted fine, and headed out to start another day in my new life, completely unaware that everything was about to change again. It started with the coffee. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after settling into her routine at the marketing firm, Tanya stood in the break room watching steam rise from her usual medium roast. The smell hit her first, rich, earthy, comforting. The same smell that had gotten her through countless early mornings, late study sessions, and stressful days. The smell that had become her morning ritual, her small comfort in this new life. Her stomach lurched violently. She barely made it to the bathroom before losing what little breakfast she'd managed to eat. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, gripping the porcelain bowl, she told herself it was stressful. Starting over in a new city, new job, new everything, of course her body was reacting. The betrayal, the upheaval, the constant low-level anxiety of proving herself in a new workplace. It made perfect sense. Food poisoning, she muttered to herself, splashing cold water on her face. Or that sushi from last night. But even as she said it, something nagged at the back of her mind. Something she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. The nausea struck again Friday morning. And Monday. By Wednesday, she couldn't even walk past a coffee shop without her stomach rebelling. Her coworker Jennifer noticed her pushing away her usual afternoon latte. "You feeling okay, Tanya? You look a little pale." "Just tired," Tanya replied, forcing a smile. "Still adjusting to everything, you know?" But that night, alone in her small apartment overlooking the Willamette River, she couldn't ignore the growing list of symptoms. The bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. The way her breasts felt tender and swollen. The strange metallic taste that lingered in her mouth no matter how often she brushed her teeth. And her period. When was her last period? Sitting on her couch with her phone calculator, she counted backwards. Once. Twice. 3 times, hoping she was wrong. But the math was merciless. 6 weeks. 6 weeks since that night with Nicholas. The night that was supposed to be just one reckless moment of rebellion. One night of feeling wanted and alive after David and Sarah had shattered her world. One night with a stranger whose last name she didn't even know. Her hands shook as she set down the phone. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She was being paranoid, letting stress get to her head. Women missed periods all the time, stress, diet changes, new environments. There were a dozen explanations that didn't involve. She couldn't even think of the word. That night, she called her mom. Her mother, Patricia, had always been her anchor, the steady voice of reason when Tanya's world felt chaotic. Sweetheart. Patricia's warm voice filled the silence of her apartment. How are you settling in? Your father and I have been worried. It's not like you to just pick up and leave without much explanation. Tanya curled into her couch, drawing a blanket around herself like armor. I'm fine, Mom. Really? Portland is, it's good for me. I needed the change. I know you said things didn't work out with David, but honey, you seemed so happy with him. What happened? The concern in her mother's voice almost broke her resolve. She wanted to tell her everything, about the engagement party, about David and Sarah's betrayal, about the way her perfect life had crumbled in a single moment. About Nicholas and that night that now felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not when she didn't even know what was happening to her own body. We just grew apart, she said instead. Sometimes these things don't work out. I'm better off without him. They talked for another 20 minutes about safer topics, her new job, the weather, her father's latest attempts at home renovation. But when she hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. The weight of secrets, of possibilities she wasn't ready to face. Friday afternoon, she found herself standing in the pharmacy aisle at the grocery store, staring at a wall of pregnancy tests. Pink boxes, blue boxes, digital displays promising results in minutes. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the most expensive one, the one that claimed to be 99% accurate. The cashier was a teenager with purple streaks in her hair who barely looked up as she scanned the test alongside Tanya's groceries. Just another transaction, nothing life-changing about it. Tanya envied her casual indifference. Back in her apartment, the small pink box sat on her bathroom counter like an unexploded bomb. She made dinner, watched Netflix, organized her already organized closet, anything to avoid the inevitable. But as the evening stretched on, she knew she couldn't postpone this forever. The instructions were simple enough. 3 minutes. That's all it would take to know whether her life was about to change forever. She set her phone timer and placed the test on the counter, plastic clattering against marble. Then she paced. 3 steps to the bathroom door, pivot, 3 steps back. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale and hollow-eyed, like a stranger wearing her face. The timer felt like it would never go off. Then, suddenly, it did. 2 pink lines. Clear as day, unmistakable. Pregnant. Tanya sank onto the closed toilet seat, the test trembling in her hands. The rational part of her mind tried to process this information, to make plans and consider options. But all she could think about was Nicholas's dark hair, intense eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. A man whose last name she didn't know. who'd been staying in a hotel room that night, probably just passing through town. She had no phone number, no address, no way to find him even if she wanted to. And did she want to? Did she want to track down a virtual stranger and tell him he was going to be a father? The thought was terrifying and oddly liberating at the same time. She spent that weekend in a haze of disbelief and panic. One moment she was researching doctors, the next she was staring at the test again, hoping the lines had somehow changed. She called in sick Monday, unable to face Jennifer's cheerful small talk or pretend everything was normal. By Tuesday, something had shifted. Maybe it was the way the morning sickness had settled into a predictable routine, or the strange flutter she felt low in her belly that might have been nerves or might have been something else entirely. But as she sat in her kitchen drinking ginger tea and watching rain streak down the windows, a new feeling began to emerge through the fear. Protectiveness. This tiny cluster of cells growing inside her, it was hers. Theirs, technically, but Nicholas was a ghost, a beautiful memory from the worst night of her life. This baby would be hers to protect, to love, to raise. The thought should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like coming home. She called her mom that night. "Mom? I need to tell you something." The conversation was harder than she'd expected. Patricia cried, then asked a dozen practical questions Tanya couldn't answer yet. Her father got on the phone, his voice gruff with emotion, telling her they'd support whatever decision she made. They offered to come to Portland to help her figure things out, but Tanya found herself declining. "I need to do this part on my own," she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "I need to know I can handle it." After 3 years of planning a life with David, of making decisions as part of a couple, of considering his opinions and preferences in everything from dinner choices to career moves, the idea of making this choice entirely for herself felt revolutionary. She scheduled an appointment with an obstetrician for the following week. Dr. Sarah Martinez was a woman about her own age, with kind eyes and a matter-of-fact way of explaining things that Tanya found comforting. The ultrasound showed a tiny blob with a rapid heartbeat that made Tanya's breath catch in her throat. "Everything looks perfectly normal," Dr. Martinez said, handing her a grainy black and white photo. "Based on your dates, you're about 7 weeks along. Do you have any questions?" 1,000 questions. But the one that mattered most, she already knew the answer to. That night, she called her parents again with the news that she was keeping the baby. Patricia cried again, but they were different tears this time. Happy tears. Her father cleared his throat several times and muttered something about getting the spare room ready for visits. "What about the father?" Patricia asked gently. "Does he know?" Tanya looked out her window at the Portland skyline, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, Nicholas was living his life, probably not thinking about the woman he'd spent one night with weeks ago. He might be married, for all she knew. He might have a whole other life that didn't include surprise pregnancies and complicated explanations. "It's complicated," she said finally. "But I can do this, Mom. I want to do this." And for the first time since seeing those 2 pink lines, she truly meant it. Over the following weeks, as her body continued its miraculous transformation and her morning sickness gradually faded, Tanya found herself settling into her new reality with surprising ease. She threw herself into research, reading everything she could about pregnancy, childbirth, and single motherhood. She started taking prenatal vitamins and switched from coffee to herbal tea without mourning the loss too deeply. At work, she told her supervisor about the pregnancy when she started showing enough that hiding it became impossible. Jennifer squealed with delight and immediately began planning a baby shower. Her co-workers rallied around her with advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and offers to help with anything she needed. Some nights, lying in bed with her hand on her growing belly, she thought about Nicholas. Wondered where he was, what he was doing, whether he ever thought about that night. But those thoughts came less frequently as the weeks passed and her focus shifted entirely to the future she was building. She was going to be a mother. A single mother, but a mother nonetheless. And despite the circumstances that had brought her here, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the reckless decision that had seemed like such a mistake at the time, she found herself grateful. This baby was giving her a purpose beyond her own healing, a reason to be strong that had nothing to do with proving anything to David or Sarah or anyone else who had hurt her. This was about love in its purest form, about creating a life and a family that would be entirely her own. For the first time since that terrible night at the engagement party, Tanya Morrison felt like she knew exactly who she was and where she was going. And it was enough. The first flutter of movement came at 20 weeks, a butterfly whisper against her ribs that made Tanya gasp and press her hand to her belly. She was sitting in the break room at Morrison & Associates, the accounting firm where she'd landed a junior position, when her son first announced his presence with that gentle kick. "Everything okay?" asked Jennifer, her colleague who'd become something of a friend over the past months. "The baby just moved," Tanya whispered, wondering, filling her voice. In that moment, everything became real in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't just a pregnancy anymore, this was her child, her son, already making himself known. That night, she called her parents from her small but comfortable apartment overlooking the Willamette River. "Mom, he moved today," she said without preamble when her mother answered. "Oh, sweetheart," her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "That's such a special moment. I remember when you first moved, we were so excited to meet you." Her father's voice came through as he picked up the extension. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" "Really?" "Strong," Tanya said, and meant it. "Scared sometimes, but strong. I think I can do this." "We know you can," her mother said firmly. "And we'll be there every step of the way." They were true to their word. When Liam Nicholas Morrison decided to make his entrance 3 weeks early on a rainy October morning, her parents were on the first flight to Portland. Tanya had been walking to work when her water broke, and by the time she made it to the hospital, contractions were coming fast and hard. 12 hours later, she held her son for the first time, and the world shifted on its axis. Liam was perfect, all pink skin and dark hair, with the most alert eyes she'd ever seen on a newborn. The nurse commented on it, how he seemed to be taking in everything around him with unusual focus. "He's going to be a smart one," her father said, tears in his eyes as he held his grandson. "Look at those eyes. He's already studying us." Tanya's mother stayed for 2 weeks, helping establish routines and teaching Tanya the confidence she needed. "Trust your instincts," she advised as they walked Liam through his fussy evening hours. "You know him better than anyone else ever will." And somehow, impossibly, that proved to be true. From the beginning, Tanya seemed to understand what Liam needed before he even cried for it. She would wake moments before he did, already reaching for him. She knew the difference between his hungry cry and his tired cry, his bored fuss and his genuine distress. Her colleagues at work were amazed at how smoothly she transitioned back after her maternity leave. Jennifer, who had 3 children of her own, shook her head in wonder. "I was a complete mess with my first. You make it look effortless." But it wasn't effortless, it was intuitive in a way that surprised even Tanya. She had energy she shouldn't have had on 3 hours of sleep. She could soothe Liam with a soft humming that seemed to work like magic. Other mothers in her new parent group often asked for her advice, as if she'd been doing this for years instead of months. As Liam grew, his unusual alertness became even more pronounced. At 6 months, he was sitting up and reaching for objects with a coordination that amazed his pediatrician. At 9 months, he was walking steadily, exploring their apartment with fearless curiosity that kept Tanya constantly vigilant. "Mama," he said clearly at 10 months, followed quickly by book and a more and up. His vocabulary exploded from there, full sentences emerging before his first birthday. By 18 months, Liam was having conversations that left daycare providers shaking their heads. "I've never seen anything like it," his teacher, Mrs. Chan, told Tanya during pickup one day. "He's reading emotions in the other children that I don't always catch." Yesterday, he brought a toy to Emma before she even started crying. He somehow knew she was about to get upset. Tanya filed these observations away, proud but not overly concerned. Her son was gifted, that was all. Some children developed faster than others. The fact that he seemed to sense her moods, that he could calm her worst days with a perfectly timed hug, that he sometimes stared at empty corners as if seeing something she couldn't, these were just the quirks of a very intelligent, very intuitive child. Her career flourished alongside her motherhood. The junior position became a senior analyst role, then a team lead position. She had a gift for numbers that her supervisors quickly recognized, an ability to spot patterns and discrepancies that others missed. The salary increases allowed her to move to a larger apartment with a yard, then eventually to buy a small house in a family-friendly neighborhood. "Look, Mama." 2-year-old Liam called from their new backyard, where he was crouched by the flower bed. "The roses are sad." Tanya looked over to see him gently touching the drooping blooms. The roses had been struggling since they moved in, despite her best efforts with plant food and careful watering. "They're just having a hard time adjusting, baby," she said. The next morning, the roses were standing tall and vibrant, their blooms fuller than she'd ever seen them. Tanya stared in amazement, then shrugged. Portland's climate was supposed to be perfect for roses. Maybe they'd finally found their footing. What she couldn't explain was how Liam always seemed to know when she'd had a difficult day at work before she even walked in the door. He would greet her with extra enthusiastic hugs, or he'd already have his favorite book ready for reading time, or he'd simply climb into her lap and pat her cheek with his small hand. "Mama's tired today," he would say matter-of-factly, and somehow his presence would ease the tension from her shoulders in a way that nothing else could. Their bedtime routine became the anchor of Tanya's day. She would tuck Liam into his toddler bed, read him stories, and listen to his chatter about his day. His observations about people and situations often surprised her with their insight. "Mrs. Patterson next door is lonely," he said one night, referring to their elderly neighbor. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" "Her house feels empty. We should make her cookies." So they did, and Mrs. Patterson's grateful tears when they appeared at her door confirmed what Liam had somehow sensed. It became a regular thing, these small acts of kindness that Liam would suggest with the casual certainty of someone much older. Tanya's social life had evolved too. She joined a single mothers group that met monthly, forging friendships with women who understood the unique challenges and joys of their situation. She'd even been on a few dates over the years, though nothing serious had developed. She was content with her life, fulfilled in ways she hadn't expected to be. "You're different than you were before," her mother observed during one of their regular video calls when Liam had just turned 3. "Stronger. More confident. Motherhood suits you." "I feel like I found who I was supposed to be," Tanya admitted, watching Liam carefully arrange his toy cars in precise patterns on the living room floor. "I never could have imagined this life, but I can't imagine any other one now." And it was true. The pain of David and Sarah's betrayal had faded to a distant memory, overwhelmed by the joy and purpose Liam had brought to her world. She was successful at work, respected by her colleagues, and secure in her home. She had friends, family support, and the most amazing little boy who challenged and delighted her every day. Liam had grown into a beautiful child, tall for his age, with thick dark hair that had a tendency to curl at the ends and those same alert eyes that had marked him from birth. They were a warm brown that sometimes seemed to shift in the light, and his gaze was far too knowing for a 3-year-old. He was affectionate and funny, with a laugh that could light up any room. He was also incredibly empathetic, often comforting other children at daycare before the teachers even realized something was wrong. He had an uncanny ability to find lost objects, somehow always knowing exactly where to look. Animals gravitated toward him in a way that amazed strangers in the park. "It's like he speaks their language," Jennifer had commented after watching Liam calm a frightened dog during one of their weekend outings. But to Tanya, these were simply the wonderful quirks that made her son special. Every parent thought their child was extraordinary, after all. She had no frame of reference to suggest that Liam's abilities were anything beyond the remarkable intuition of a gifted child. Their life had settled into comfortable rhythms. Mornings were a carefully choreographed dance of breakfast, getting ready for daycare and work, with Liam chattering about his dreams from the night before, always vivid, often featuring animals or places they'd never been. Evenings were for dinner, playground time if weather permitted, bath and stories, and the quiet conversations that had become Tanya's favorite part of each day. "Tell me about your day, little man," she would say, and Liam would regale her with detailed accounts of his adventures, his observations about his teachers and classmates, and his plans for tomorrow's activities. Weekends meant library visits, trips to the farmer's market, playdates with other children from daycare. Liam was social and well-adjusted, though he had a tendency to gravitate toward older children who could keep up with his advanced vocabulary and complex thoughts. Her parents visited every few months. Liam charmed everyone he met, though Tanya noticed he sometimes grew quiet around certain people, clinging to her side in a way that was unusual for him. She'd learned to trust those instincts. Invariably, the people who made Liam uncomfortable turned out to have good reasons to be avoided. As summer approached in Liam's third year, Tanya felt a deep contentment with the life they'd built. Her latest performance review had been glowing, with talk of potential partnership track in the firm's future. Liam was thriving in his preschool program, already reading at a first-grade level and showing an aptitude for mathematics that reminded Tanya of herself. They had routines and traditions, inside jokes and shared adventures. They had their favorite restaurants, their preferred hiking trails, their special spots in the city that felt uniquely theirs. Portland had truly become home in every sense of the word. On a particularly beautiful June evening, as they sat in their backyard watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, Liam curled against Tanya's side on the porch swing they'd installed the previous spring. "Mama," he said thoughtfully, "are we always going to live here?" "Would you like to?" she asked, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "I like it here. It feels safe." He paused, then added with the matter-of-fact tone he used for his most profound observations, "But sometimes I dream about other places. Places with big trees and mountains. Places that feel important." Tanya smiled, assuming he was thinking about their recent camping trip to Mount Hood. "Well, we can always visit other places. But this is our home, sweetheart. This is where we belong." Liam nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer, and they sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared overhead. Tanya felt the deep peace that had become her default state, the quiet confidence of a woman who had built something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that forces she'd never imagined were already in motion, drawing her back toward a destiny she'd never known awaited her. For now, there was just this moment, her son's warm weight against her side, the gentle creak of the swing, and the absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Life was good. They were happy, healthy, and whole. And that was enough for Tanya Morrison, more than enough. It was everything she'd never dared to dream possible in those dark hours after David's betrayal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as all tomorrows did. But tonight, in their peaceful backyard sanctuary, mother and son were exactly where they belonged. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was rushing around the kitchen, trying to pack Liam's lunch and find his favorite dinosaur toy before daycare. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop, and I almost ignored it until I saw my mother's name on the screen. She never called this early unless something was wrong. "Mom?" I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I zipped Liam's backpack. "Everything okay?" The silence on the other end made my stomach drop. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Tanya, honey, I need you to sit down." I stopped moving entirely. Liam looked up at me from where he was carefully arranging his toy cars in a line, his dark eyes, so much like his father's, though he'd never know that, studying my face with that uncanny perception he'd always had. "What is it?" I whispered. "It's your father. He had a heart attack yesterday evening. He's..." Her voice broke. He's in intensive care, Tanya. The doctors aren't sure if he's going to make it. The world tilted sideways. My father is strong, stubborn, always working in his garden or fixing something around the house, couldn't be lying in a hospital bed fighting for his life. It didn't make sense. I'm coming, I heard myself say, though my mind was already racing ahead to all the complications this would bring. I'll be there as soon as I can. Tanya, you don't have to. Mom, stop. He's my father. Of course I'm coming. I looked down at Liam, who had abandoned his cars and was now standing beside me, his small hand resting on my leg. We're both coming. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, this beautiful kitchen in the life I'd built from nothing, and felt the walls of my carefully constructed world begin to shift. For 3 years, I hadn't set foot in my hometown. For 3 years, I'd managed to keep this part of my life completely separate from that part. Clean. Safe. But now I had no choice. Mama sad? Liam asked, tugging on my pajama pants. His vocabulary was advanced for 3, something that never failed to amaze the daycare workers. Sometimes when he looked at me with those knowing eyes, I wondered what he understood that I didn't. I crouched down to his level, smoothing his dark hair that had the same slight wave as the man who'd given it to him. Grandpa is sick, sweetheart. We need to go visit him and Grandma. The grandpa with the big garden? That's right. My throat tightened. Liam had only met my parents twice, once when I brought him home as a newborn, terrified and exhausted, and again last Christmas when they'd made the trip to Portland. Both times, they'd fallen completely in love with him, and he with them. My father had spent hours showing Liam pictures of his prize-winning tomatoes, promising that someday they'd plant a garden together. The irony wasn't lost on me that my father might never get that chance, and it was partially because I'd been too afraid to bring my son home more often. I called my boss, explaining the family emergency with the kind of calm efficiency I'd perfected over the years. Rachel was understanding, she had kids of her own, and told me to take all the time I needed. I called Liam's daycare next, then sat down at my laptop to book flights. But as I stared at the departure city and typed in my hometown's airport code, my hands started shaking. Going back meant potentially seeing David. It meant possibly running into Sarah. It meant walking through streets where everyone would remember me as the girl whose fiancé had cheated on her at their own engagement party. The girl who'd disappeared the next day without a word of explanation to anyone except her parents. Worse than any of that, it meant taking Liam into that world. My beautiful, innocent boy who knew nothing about the mess I'd left behind. Who thought his mother was strong and capable and had never been broken by anyone. What if we ran into David at the grocery store? What if Sarah was still living there, still part of the social circle I'd once belonged to? What if people asked questions about Liam's father that I wasn't prepared to answer? I'd built such a perfect life here in Portland. Clean slate, fresh start, no complications. Liam was growing up confident and happy, surrounded by people who only knew the version of me I'd become, the successful marketing consultant, the devoted single mother, the woman who had her life together. But as I sat there spiraling through worst-case scenarios, Liam climbed onto the couch beside me and curled up against my side. His small body was warm and solid, reminding me of what mattered most. "We help Grandpa feel better?" he asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "We're going to try, baby." And just like that, the decision was made. Not because I was brave enough to face my past, but because my father needed me. Because my mother was probably sitting in a hospital waiting room right now, scared and alone. Because family came first, even when it meant walking back into a minefield of memories I'd spent 3 years trying to forget. I booked the flights for the next morning. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. I packed our clothes, trying to decide how long we might need to stay. A few days? A week? Longer, if the worst happened? I packed conservative outfits for myself, nothing too stylish or expensive looking. I didn't want to seem like I was showing off, proving that I'd done well for myself after the disaster of my broken engagement. For Liam, I packed his favorite books, his stuffed elephant, and enough toys to keep him entertained during what would likely be long, boring hours at the hospital. I found myself packing extra comfort items, things he might need if we encountered any difficult situations. As evening approached, I called my mother back to let her know our flight details. She sounded exhausted but relieved that we were coming. "How is he?" I asked. "Stable, for now. He's awake, which is good. He keeps asking for you." My chest tightened. "Tell him we'll be there tomorrow." Tanya. I should warn you. David's parents are still close family friends. They've been at the hospital today, offering support. There's a chance you might see them. I closed my eyes. Of course they were. David's mother had been like a second mother to me for years. His father had walked me down the aisle at my college graduation when my own father couldn't make it due to work. They were good people who'd had nothing to do with their son's betrayal, but seeing them would still be a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. "Okay," I said simply. "I'll deal with it." "You don't have to deal with anything, sweetheart. You just need to be here for Dad." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing ever was when you were returning to a place you'd fled from. That night, after Liam was asleep, I stood in his doorway watching him breathe. He looked so peaceful, so untouched by the complications of adult life. Tomorrow I'd be taking him into territory that held landmines I couldn't predict or control. But I'd also be introducing him to a part of his heritage, the town where I'd grown up, the house where I'd learned to ride a bike and had my first heartbreak long before David ever came along. Maybe it was time to stop running from that part of my story. Maybe it was time for both of us to see where I came from, even if it meant risking some of the perfect peace we'd built here. I went to bed that night with my suitcase by the door and my boarding passes printed and ready. In the morning, we'd get on a plane and fly back to everything I'd left behind. But this time, I wouldn't be going alone. This time, I'd have Liam with me, my strength, my purpose, my reminder of who I'd become in the years since I'd run away. Whatever waited for us there, we'd face it together. The airport was busy with early morning travelers, and I found myself grateful for the distraction of managing our luggage and keeping track of Liam as we made our way through security. He was fascinated by everything, the escalators, the airplanes visible through the massive windows, the coffee shops and bookstores lining the concourse. "Big Bird," he announced excitedly, pointing at our plane as we approached the gate. "That's right, buddy. That's our big bird that's going to take us to see Grandma and Grandpa." As we settled into our seats, Liam pressed his face to the window, and I pulled out my phone to text my mother our gate number and expected arrival time. My hands were steadier than they'd been yesterday, and I realized that somewhere between booking the flights and actually boarding the plane, I'd shifted into the mindset that had gotten me through the hardest moments of the past 3 years. I was Liam Nicholas Morrison's mother. I was a successful professional who'd built a good life through her own determination and hard work. I was a daughter whose father needed her. I wasn't the broken girl who'd left this town 3 years ago. As the plane lifted off, carrying us toward whatever waited ahead, I squeezed Liam's hand and watched Portland grow smaller below us. We were going home, not to stay, but to face whatever needed facing. And when it was over, we'd come back to our real home, our real life. But first, there were some ghosts to confront. The familiar Main Street stretched before us like a scene from a half-remembered dream. 3.5 years had changed some things: new storefronts, fresh paint on the old hardware store, a trendy coffee shop where Patterson's 5 and Dime used to be, but the bones of my hometown remained stubbornly the same. The same cracked sidewalk outside the bank where I'd learned to ride my bike. The same crooked stop sign at Miller and 3rd that the city council had been meaning to fix for a decade. The same weight in my chest that made breathing feel like work. Liam pressed his face against the car window, eyes wide with curiosity. "Mama, is this where you grew up?" "Yes, baby." I managed to keep my voice steady as I pulled into a parking spot outside Murphy's Diner. This is where I lived before I moved to Portland. Before I was in your tummy? The innocent question hit me like a physical blow. Yes, sweetheart. Before you were even a twinkle in my eye. I helped him out of his car seat, trying to ignore the curious glances from passersby. Word traveled fast in a town this size, and I had no doubt that my return had already made the rounds of the local gossip network. Tanya Morrison's back. Did you see? She's got a little boy with her. Wonder who the father is? Remember what happened at her engagement party? The thought made my jaw clench. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. I wasn't the same scared, humiliated girl who'd left this place with her heart in pieces. I was Liam's mother now, and that made me capable of anything. The bell above Murphy's door chimed our arrival, and I felt every head in the diner turn our way. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease washed over me, bringing back 1,000 memories I wasn't ready to face. Sunday mornings here with my parents after church. Study sessions with my high school friends. The nervous breakfast David and I had shared the morning he'd asked me to move in with him. I pushed that last memory away with practiced efficiency and guided Liam to a booth by the window. Well, I'll be damned. I looked up to find Dolores Martinez approaching our table, coffee pot in hand, and that same knowing smile she'd worn when I was 16 and sneaking glances at Tommy Hernandez during summer break. Her dark hair was streaked with silver now, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, but otherwise she looked exactly the same. Tanya Morrison. I heard through the grapevine that you might be coming back to town. She set down 2 menus and filled my coffee cup without asking. And this must be your little boy. Aren't you a heartbreaker? Liam beamed at the attention, his natural charm already working its magic. I'm Liam Nicholas Morrison. I'm 3 years old, and I live in Portland with my mama. Nicholas, Dolores repeated, and I saw the wheels turning behind her eyes. The middle name was unusual enough to stick in people's minds, and I braced myself for the inevitable questions. That's a strong name for a strong boy. My mama picked it, Liam announced proudly, launching into his usual chatter about our life in Portland, his favorite playground, and the cat that lived in our building's courtyard. Dolores listened with the patience of someone who'd raised 5 children of her own, nodding and making appropriate sounds of amazement. But I could feel her curiosity like a living thing, pressing against the boundaries of small-town politeness. So you're visiting? She asked me when Liam paused to examine the kids' menu. I heard about your dad's heart attack. Scared us all, to be honest. He's always been such a fixture around here. He's stable now, I said, grateful for the safe topic. Still in the hospital, but the doctors are optimistic. Mom's practically living there, so I thought I'd bring Liam to meet his grandfather properly. It was a careful truth. Liam had met my parents during their visits to Portland, but they'd never spent extended time together. And I'd never brought him here, to the place where his story truly began. That's wonderful, Dolores said, and her warmth seemed genuine. Your parents are good people. They never stopped talking about you, you know. Even after everything happened. They were so proud when they heard about your job in Portland, and then when the little one came along. She smiled down at Liam, who was now carefully coloring the dragon on his placemat. They light up like Christmas trees whenever someone mentions his name. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. It was good to know that my parents had handled the gossip with grace, that they'd protected both Liam and me from the worst of the speculation. What can I get you too? Dolores asked, pulling out her order pad. Chocolate chip pancakes. Liam announced before I could speak. With whipped cream and strawberries, please. A man who knows what he wants, Dolores laughed. I like that. And for you, honey? Just the pancakes for him. I'll have the vegetable omelet and wheat toast. My stomach was too twisted with nerves to handle anything heavier. Dolores jotted down our order, then hesitated. You know, it's funny you should come back now. We've got someone new in town, moved into the old Brennan place up on Willow Street about a month ago. My name's Veronica Harper. Strangest thing, though, when I first saw her, I could have sworn. She shook her head with a little laugh. Well, she reminded me of you somehow. Same way of holding herself, maybe, or something about the eyes. Probably just my imagination, but it gave me such a start. I made a polite sound of interest, but my attention was already fracturing. Through the diner's front window, I could see Mrs. Patterson from the dry cleaners pointing in our direction, her companion's head swiveling to get a look at us. At the counter, two men in work clothes were stealing glances while pretending to focus on their coffee. Anyway, Dolores continued, she's an interesting woman. Keeps to herself mostly, but friendly enough when you catch her at the grocery store. Claims she's some kind of researcher or historian. Always asking questions about local families and such. The information floated past me without really registering. I was too focused on the growing awareness that we were the afternoon's entertainment for half the diner. The weight of their curiosity felt oppressive, like humidity before a storm. Mama? Liam's voice cut through my spiraling anxiety. Why is everyone looking at us? From the mouths of babes. I forced a smile and reached over to smooth his dark hair. Because you're the most handsome boy they've ever seen, and they can't believe how lucky I am. He giggled, accepting the explanation with the easy confidence of a child who'd never known anything but unconditional love. But I caught the sharp look Dolores gave me, the understanding that passed between two women who knew how cruel small-town gossip could be. I'll get that order started, she said, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. And don't you worry about the looky-loose. Half of them are just curious about this beautiful boy, and the other half are wondering if you got even prettier while you were gone. Which you did, by the way. I managed a grateful smile as she walked away, but the compliment couldn't quite penetrate the armor I'd built around my heart. Pretty was what had gotten me into trouble before, pretty enough to catch David's attention, naive enough to believe his promises, trusting enough to let my best friend close enough to destroy me. The woman I'd become in Portland valued different qualities. Strength. Independence. The fierce protectiveness that had surprised everyone, including myself, when Liam was born. I might look the same on the outside, but everything that mattered had been forged in the fire of single motherhood and hard-won self-respect. Tanya? Oh my God, Tanya Morrison. I looked up to see Jennifer Walsh sliding into the booth across from us, her face bright with the kind of aggressive friendliness that always made me uncomfortable. We'd been acquaintances in high school, friendly enough, but never close. The kind of person who remembered your birthday on Facebook but couldn't tell you what you were afraid of in the dark. Jennifer, I said carefully. How are you? I'm great. Married Jim Kowalski, remember him from graduation? And we've got twin girls now. They're 6. Her eyes immediately shifted to Liam, who was watching our interaction with the solemn attention he gave all new adults. And who is this little angel? This is my son, Liam. He's gorgeous. Those eyes, they're just incredible. He must get them from his father. The question hung in the air like smoke, casual and poisonous. I felt my spine straighten, every protective instinct I'd developed over the past 3 years coming online at once. He gets his good looks from his mama, I said with a smile that probably looked more like a warning. Jennifer had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Of course. I just meant, well, you know how it is. People are curious. It's been so long since you left, and then you come back with this beautiful little boy. I came back because my father had a heart attack, I said quietly. Liam is my son. That's really all anyone needs to know. The temperature at our table seemed to drop several degrees. Jennifer's smile became fixed and artificial. Right. Of course. I'm sorry about your dad, I heard he's doing better? Much better, thank you. That's wonderful. Well, I should probably. She gestured vaguely toward the door. It was so good to see you again. Maybe we can catch up properly sometime while you're in town. Maybe, I agreed, knowing we both understood it would never happen. After she left, Liam looked at me with those perceptive eyes that sometimes made him seem older than his 3 years. She seemed sad, Mama. Some people ask questions that aren't really their business, baby. It makes them sad when they don't get the answers they want. He nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense, and went back to his coloring. But I could see him processing the interaction, filing away another small lesson about how the world worked outside our safe bubble in Portland. Dolores returned with our food, and I was grateful for the distraction. Liam dove into his pancakes with 3-year-old enthusiasm, getting whipped cream on his nose and strawberry juice on his shirt. Watching him eat, completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of chocolate chips and sweet cream, I felt some of my tension ease. This was what mattered. This perfect little boy who called me Mama and trusted me to keep him safe. The rest, the gossip, the speculation, the inevitable encounters with people from my past, was just noise. But as I picked at my omelet, my eyes kept drifting to the diner's windows, searching the street outside for familiar faces I wasn't ready to see. David worked at the bank now, according to my mother. Sarah had taken over her family's real estate business. It was only a matter of time before our paths crossed, and when they did, I wanted to be ready. I wanted them to see exactly what I'd become without them. Strong. Independent. Completely devoted to the family I built from scratch. I wanted them to understand that their betrayal had been the best thing that ever happened to me because it had led me to this moment, to this incredible child who made every sacrifice worthwhile. But beneath that fierce pride, a smaller voice whispered the truth I didn't want to acknowledge. I was terrified of seeing them again. Not because I still cared about them, but because I was afraid of who I might become in their presence. The girl I used to be, trusting, eager to please, desperate to be loved, felt dangerously close to the surface in this place that held so many memories of her. All done. Liam announced, pushing his empty plate away with satisfaction. Good job, sweetheart. Are you ready to go see Grandpa and Grandma? His face lit up. Yes. Is Grandpa going to feel better when he sees me? The question nearly broke my heart with its innocence. I think seeing you is going to be the best medicine he could ask for. As I paid Dolores and gathered our things, I caught her watching me with something that looked like approval. You did good, honey, she said quietly. That little boy is lucky to have you. Thank you, I managed, surprised by how much the simple validation meant to me. Walking back to the car, Liam's hand secured in mine, I felt the weight of the town's attention like sunshine on my shoulders, warm but intense, impossible to ignore. This place might hold painful memories, but it was also where my parents lived, where my father was recovering from the scare that had reminded us all how precious and fragile life could be. I could handle the gossip. I could deflect the intrusive questions and protect Liam from the small-minded curiosity of people who had nothing better to do than speculate about my personal life. What I wasn't sure I could handle was the inevitable moment when I came face to face with the two people who had taught me that love could be a weapon, trust could be a weakness, and sometimes the people closest to you were the ones who could hurt you most. But that was a bridge I'd cross when I came to it. For now, I had a little boy to introduce to his grandfather, a father to help heal, and a mother who needed me to be strong. Everything else could wait. As we drove through the familiar streets toward the hospital, Liam chattering excitedly about the funny pancakes, and the nice lady with the coffee, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't expected, hope. Maybe coming back didn't have to be about facing the past. Maybe it could be about building something new, a bridge between the life I built in Portland and the family I'd left behind, a way for Liam to know his grandparents properly, a chance to prove to myself that I was strong enough to be here without losing the person I'd become. The future felt uncertain, full of potential complications and emotional minefields I couldn't predict. But with Liam humming softly in his car seat and the afternoon sun painting everything golden, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Over the next few days, as I settled into the rhythm of being back home, I started noticing things. Small things that might have been nothing, or might have been everything. It began with sleep. For the first time in months, both Liam and I were sleeping deeply, completely. In Portland, I'd grown used to restless nights, tossing and turning, waking up feeling like I'd run a marathon in my dreams. But here, in my childhood bedroom with Liam curled up beside me, we both slept like the dead. And the dreams were different. Vivid, but not disturbing. I found myself dreaming of forests and rivers, of places that felt familiar even though I'd never seen them before. When I woke, I felt refreshed in a way I hadn't experienced in years. "Mama, I like it here," Liam announced over breakfast on our third morning. He was sitting at my parents' kitchen table, systematically eating his way through a stack of pancakes my mother had made. "It smells right." I paused, coffee mug halfway to my lips. "What do you mean, baby?" He scrunched up his nose, considering. "Portland smells like cars and rain. This place smells like home." It was such a simple observation, but it made something in my chest tighten. Because he was right. There was something about being here that felt right in a way I couldn't explain. Later that day, when we visited my father in the hospital, I noticed something else. I'd always been good at reading people, it was part of what made me successful in marketing. But lately, it was like someone had turned up the volume on that ability. I could sense the nurses' moods before they spoke, could tell which doctors were having good days and which were stressed. When the cardiologist came to discuss my father's prognosis, I knew he had good news before he even opened his mouth. "Your father's recovery is remarkable," Dr. Patterson said, reviewing the charts. "We expected a much longer healing process given the severity of the attack, but his vitals are stronger than men half his age." As he spoke, I found myself studying his face, picking up on micro-expressions I'd never noticed before. There was something he wasn't saying, not anything bad, but something that puzzled him. I had the strangest urge to ask him about it, but caught myself. When had I become so perceptive? Liam, meanwhile, had charmed every single staff member at the hospital. But it wasn't just his natural 3-year-old charisma. He seemed to know instinctively which people were safe, which ones genuinely cared, and which were just going through the motions. When the gruff night janitor came by, Liam immediately warmed to him, chattering away about trucks and dinosaurs. Later, I overheard 2 nurses talking about how that same janitor rarely spoke to anyone, how he'd been working there for 15 years and kept to himself. "That boy of yours has a gift," my mother said as we drove home. "He reminds me of you at that age. You always knew things about people that you couldn't possibly know." I glanced at her in surprise. "I did?" "Oh yes. You'd refuse to go near certain strangers, but you'd walk right up to others and start talking like you'd known them forever. Your father and I used to joke that you had radar for people's intentions." That evening, while Liam played in the backyard with my parents' old golden retriever, Max, I watched from the kitchen window. Max had always been friendly, but he'd grown more reserved in his old age, content to lie in his favorite sunny spot and observe the world. With Liam, though, he was a different dog entirely. They seemed to communicate without words. Liam would change direction just before Max did, as if they'd planned their games in advance. "He's never been that playful with other children," my mother commented, joining me at the window. "It's like they understand each other." I nodded, but didn't trust myself to speak. Because watching them, I had the oddest sensation that she was right. They did understand each other, in a way that shouldn't be possible between a 3-year-old and a dog. That night, as I was putting Liam to bed, he looked up at me with those serious dark eyes, so much like his father's, though he didn't know it. "Mama, why do I hear things other people don't hear?" My heart skipped. "What kind of things, sweetheart?" "Like when Grandpa's doctor was talking to you today. He was worried about something, but not about Grandpa. Something else." "And the lady at the store yesterday?" She was sad inside, even though she was smiling. I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, my mind racing. Sometimes people who care a lot about others can pick up on feelings. It just means you have a big heart. He seemed to accept this explanation, but as I kissed him goodnight and turned off the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. Standing in the hallway outside his door, I took a deep breath and tried to make sense of what had been happening since we'd arrived. The improved sleep, the enhanced intuition, Liam's uncanny ability to read people and connect with animals, individually, each thing could be explained away. Better rest leading to clearer thinking. A child's natural empathy. The comfort of being around family during a stressful time. But together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Something was different about being here. Something was changing in both of us, awakening after lying dormant for years. I didn't understand what it was, but I could feel it growing stronger each day, like a song played just below the threshold of hearing, becoming clearer note by note. Whatever was happening to us, I had the feeling it was just the beginning. 3 days into our stay at my parents' house, while Dad was resting comfortably and his color had returned to normal, I found myself restless. The familiar walls that had once comforted me now felt confining, and Liam's energy was becoming harder to contain in the small space. He'd been asking repeatedly about exploring the neighborhood, his 3-year-old curiosity piqued by every sound and shadow. "Mama, can we go for a walk?" he asked for the 4th time that morning, pressing his face against the living room window. "I want to see the big house." I followed his gaze down the tree-lined street to where the old Victorian mansion sat at the end of the cul-de-sac. The Harper house, as locals had always called it, had been empty for as long as I could remember. Its Gothic windows and wraparound porch had fascinated me as a child, though my parents had always steered me away from it. "Which house, sweetheart?" I asked, though I knew exactly which one had captured his attention. "The pretty one with all the windows," he said, pointing. "Someone's there now. I saw her in the garden yesterday." My mother looked up from her magazine, a slight frown creasing her features. "Mrs. Chen mentioned someone had moved into Harper Place last week. A woman, apparently. Been fixing up the garden." The Harper Place. The name sent an odd shiver through me, though I couldn't place why. Perhaps it was simply the childhood memories of being warned away, or maybe the way Liam seemed so drawn to it. "Can we go say hello?" Liam asked, his bright eyes pleading. "She might be lonely." My mother's expression softened. "That's very thoughtful of you, Liam. Your grandmother used to say the Harper family were good people, just private." Something in her tone caught my attention. "You knew them?" "Not well," Mom admitted. "They kept to themselves mostly. The last I heard, the family had scattered. I'm surprised no one came back." Liam tugged on my sleeve. "Please, Mama. I promise I'll be good." The earnestness in his voice made the decision for me. Besides, a walk would do us both good, and meeting a neighbor seemed like the polite thing to do. "All right, but just for a few minutes. We don't want to intrude." The afternoon air was crisp as we walked down the familiar sidewalk, Liam's small hand warm in mine. The Harper house grew larger as we approached, and I found myself appreciating details I'd never noticed as a child. The architecture was stunning, intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and a garden that was clearly being lovingly restored. As we reached the front gate, a woman emerged from behind a cluster of rose bushes. She was perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and the kind of timeless grace that spoke of good breeding. Her clothes were simple but well cut, and there was something about the way she moved that reminded me of a dancer. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold. They were the exact shade of green as my own. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Her gaze moved from me to Liam, and something shifted in her expression, surprise, recognition, and something else I couldn't identify. "Hi." Liam called out, completely uninhibited. "I'm Liam Nicholas Morrison, and this is my mama, Tanya." We live down the street with my grandparents. The woman's face went very still. Morrison, she repeated softly, as though testing the name. How interesting. She straightened, wiping her hands on a gardening apron. I'm Veronica Harper. And you, my dear, she said, looking directly at me, look remarkably familiar. There was something unsettling about the intensity of her stare, as though she were seeing more than just my face. I felt exposed under that green gaze, like she could read secrets I didn't even know I was keeping. We wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood, I managed, finding my voice. Liam insisted we come say hello. How wonderfully old-fashioned, Veronica said, her smile warming. Please, come in. I was just about to have tea, and I'd love the company. Liam was already pushing through the gate, drawn like a magnet to the garden. I watched in amazement as he went straight to a patch of herbs, kneeling down to smell them with an expression of pure bliss. Liam, be careful, I called, but Veronica held up a hand. Let him explore. Children often have better instincts than adults about what's safe. She watched him with obvious delight. He has excellent intuition. The comment struck me as odd, but before I could ask what she meant, Liam had moved on to a small fountain where water trickled over smooth stones. He sat cross-legged beside it, completely content, as though he belonged there. He's never been one to sit still for long, I said, more to myself than to Veronica. Some children are more sensitive to their environment, she replied thoughtfully. They're drawn to places of power, of peace. This garden has both. Again, that odd way of speaking, as though there were layers of meaning beneath her words. I followed her up the porch steps, noting how the boards didn't creak despite the house's obvious age. The interior took my breath away. What had once been a grand Victorian home had been lovingly restored, but there was something more, an atmosphere of warmth and welcome that seemed almost tangible. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns on the polished hardwood floors. The air smelled of lavender and something else, something green and growing. Your home is beautiful, I said, meaning it. It's good to be back, Veronica replied, leading me toward what was obviously the kitchen. I spent many years away, but this place, it calls to family. Family. There was that word again, spoken with particular emphasis. I watched as she moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing tea with the kind of ritual that suggested long habit. Everything about her seemed familiar, from the way she held herself to the graceful economy of her movements. How long were you away? I asked, accepting the delicate china cup she offered. Oh, decades. I left when I was quite young, family disagreements, you understand. But when I heard... She paused, studying me over her teacup. Well, circumstances change. Sometimes we're called back to handle unfinished business. Through the window, I could see Liam still sitting by the fountain, now apparently having a serious conversation with a tabby cat that had appeared from nowhere. The sight made me smile. He'd always had such a natural way with animals, just like he did with my parents' old dog back home. There was something almost magical about how creatures seemed drawn to him, though I'd never thought much about it until now. He's very special, your son, Veronica observed, following my gaze. He is, I agreed, though something in her tone suggested she meant more than just maternal pride. And his father? The question caught me off guard. Not in the picture, I said carefully. Veronica nodded, as though she'd expected this answer. Sometimes the most important connections happen when we least expect them. But they leave their mark, don't they? I thought of Nicholas, of the night that had changed everything, of the dreams that still visited me sometimes. Yes, I whispered. They do. You have his eyes, she said suddenly. Whose eyes? Liam's father. I can see it in the boy, that particular shade of intensity. But he has your spirit, your strength. She set down her teacup with a soft clink. Tell me, Tanya, have you ever felt like you don't quite fit? Like there's something just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge? The question was so unexpected, so precisely accurate, that I nearly dropped my own cup. How did you? Family resemblances run deeper than just physical features, she said gently. Sometimes we inherit gifts we don't understand, potential we've never explored. Before I could ask what she meant, Liam appeared at the kitchen door, the tabby cat in his arms. Both looked completely content, as though they'd been companions for years. Mama, can we stay longer? Whiskers wants to show me the secret garden. Whiskers? I looked at Veronica, who was smiling with obvious delight. The cat's name is actually Minerva, but children often hear things differently. And there is indeed a more private garden in the back, herbs mostly, some very old varieties. Something about the way she said old varieties sent a shiver up my spine. There were undercurrents here I didn't understand, connections being made that felt both natural and impossible. Perhaps, Veronica said carefully, you'd both like to come back tomorrow? There are some things I'd like to show you, family things that might interest you. Family things? I echoed. Her green eyes met mine, and in them I saw knowledge, secrets, and something that looked remarkably like hope. Sometimes we find family in the most unexpected places, my dear. And sometimes family finds us when we need it most. Liam had wandered back outside, still carrying the cat, his laughter floating through the open door. Watching him, I felt something shift inside me, as though a door I hadn't known existed was slowly opening. Yes, I heard myself saying. We'd like that very much. Veronica's smile was radiant. Excellent. Tomorrow then, same time. And Tanya? She reached out to touch my hand briefly, her fingers surprisingly warm. Trust your instincts. They're stronger than you know. As we walked back down the street, Liam chattering excitedly about his new friend Whiskers and the promise of seeing the secret garden, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just changed. Veronica Harper wasn't just a new neighbor, she was something more, something that connected to parts of myself I'd never fully understood. That night, as I tucked Liam into bed in my childhood room, he looked up at me with those serious eyes that seemed far too wise for his age. Mama? Yes, sweetheart? Miss Veronica feels like family. Does that make sense? I smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead, thinking of green eyes and knowing smiles, and the way the very air had seemed to hum with possibility in that beautiful house. Yes, Liam, I said softly. It makes perfect sense. And as I turned out the light, I found myself wondering what tomorrow would bring, what secrets Veronica Harper was hiding, and why, for the first time in years, I felt like I might finally be coming home to something I'd never known I was missing. The week following my first meeting with Veronica had been a whirlwind of conversations, revelations, and growing awareness that my life was changing in ways I couldn't yet fully understand. That evening, after Liam was finally asleep, I'd sat with my parents in their familiar living room and tried to explain the impossible. She looks just like you, sweetheart, my mother had said, her eyes bright with curiosity and something that might have been relief. I always wondered if we'd ever meet someone from your biological family. And she seems so refined. Educated. My father, still pale from his recent heart attack but getting stronger every day, had been more cautious. What does she want, Tanya? People don't just appear after 25 years without a reason. I'd chosen my words carefully, not ready to share everything Veronica had hinted at during our cafe conversation. She said she's been looking for me since she moved back to the country. She has information about my birth mother, about why I was placed for adoption. She'd like to share some family history. What I didn't tell them was how the air had seemed to shimmer around Veronica, how Liam had been unusually calm and focused in her presence, or how I'd felt a recognition so deep it had made my bones ache. I especially didn't mention the dreams that had started that very night, vivid, colorful dreams of places that felt like memories of a life I'd never lived. Over the next few days, small things had begun to change. Plants in my parents' house seemed brighter, more vibrant when I was around. I'd absent-mindedly touched a wilting African violet on the kitchen windowsill, and by the next morning it was blooming with flowers more abundant than my mother had ever seen. When she'd marveled at its sudden recovery, I just shrugged and suggested maybe it needed more water. Liam, too, was showing changes. His usual friendliness with animals had become something more intense. He'd spent an entire afternoon sitting perfectly still while a robin perched nearby, both of them seeming to sense something in the other. His hearing had become remarkably sharp. He'd point toward the woods and say, "Something's coming," minutes before I'd hear a car on the distant road. When I'd ask how he knew, he'd just shrug and say it smelled different. It was during one of these quiet evenings, watching my father slowly regain his strength while my mother fussed over him, that I'd finally found the courage to tell them the truth about David and Sarah. "I never told you the real reason I broke the engagement," I'd said, settling into the chair where I'd spent countless childhood evenings doing homework. "I let you think it was cold feet, that I just wasn't ready. But that wasn't it." My parents had exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that comes from 30 years of marriage, before my mother had reached over and taken my hand. "We knew there was more to it," she'd said gently. "You don't just pack up your entire life and move across the country because of cold feet. But we figured you'd tell us when you were ready." So I'd told them. About finding David and Sarah together at what should have been our engagement celebration. About the betrayal that had cut so deep I'd thought I might never recover. About the strength I'd found in building a new life, in becoming Liam's mother, in discovering who I really was when I wasn't trying to be perfect for someone else. "Oh, honey," my mother had whispered, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry you went through that alone." I wasn't alone, I'd assured them. I had you, even from a distance. And I had myself. I learned that was enough. My father had been quiet for a long moment before speaking. "That's why you came back, isn't it? When you heard about my heart attack. You wanted to make sure we knew you were okay, that you'd survived it." "I came back because family matters," I'd said simply. "You're my family. You raised me, loved me, gave me everything I needed to become who I am. That doesn't change because I want to learn about where I came from." It was the next day that Veronica had called, asking if I'd like to see the family property, to understand more about my heritage. Something in her voice had suggested urgency, though she'd been careful not to alarm me. "Bring Liam," she'd said. "There are things about his nature, about both of your natures, that will make more sense if you see where your bloodline comes from." And so here we were, the drive to Veronica's family property winding through mountain roads I'd never traveled before, despite growing up in this town. Ancient trees formed a canopy overhead, their branches intertwining in ways that seemed almost deliberate, as if they were protecting whatever lay beyond. Liam sat quietly in his car seat, his eyes wide as he watched the forest pass by, occasionally pointing at birds or squirrels with the kind of focused attention that had become increasingly common since we'd returned home. "The property has been in our family for over 2 centuries, Veronica said from the passenger seat, her voice carrying a reverence that made me sit up straighter. "Your great-great-grandmother built the main house when she first came to America. She chose this location very carefully. The land itself has special properties." I wanted to ask what she meant by special properties, but the words caught in my throat as we rounded a bend and the house came into view. It wasn't a mansion exactly, but it was grander than anything I'd expected, a 3-story Victorian with wraparound porches, ornate woodwork, and windows that seemed to catch light in impossible ways. Gardens sprawled around the house in seemingly wild abundance, though I could sense an underlying order to the apparent chaos. "Mama, look." Liam's excited voice broke through my amazement, pointing toward the gardens. "They smell like music." I turned to follow his gaze and felt my breath catch. The garden did seem to shimmer with an energy I couldn't quite name, and there was something about the way the colors seemed more vivid, more alive than any garden I'd ever seen. When I blinked, trying to focus, it was still extraordinary, but in a way that felt natural rather than magical. "He sees it already," Veronica murmured, glancing back at Liam with something that looked like pride mixed with concern. "His heritage is stronger than I expected." Much stronger. We parked in a circular drive lined with what looked like rose bushes, though the roses were colors I'd never seen before, deep purples that seemed to shift to silver in the light, whites with edges that gleamed like pearls. Liam practically bounced out of his car seat, immediately drawn to a butterfly that was easily the size of my hand, with wings that looked like they were made of stained glass. "Stay close to Mama," I called automatically, but Veronica placed a gentle hand on my arm. "He's perfectly safe here," she said softly. "This land recognizes him. It knows he belongs." The front door opened before we reached it, though I hadn't seen Veronica use a key or remote. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior, high ceilings with intricate moldings, hardwood floors that gleamed with a warm patina of age, and furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. But what struck me most was how it felt. The house didn't feel like a museum or a showplace. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. "Welcome to Silverbrook Manor," Veronica said, watching my reaction carefully. "This is your birthright, Tanya. This is where you truly come from." She led us through the main hall into a sitting room dominated by a massive stone fireplace. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and portraits of women who all bore a striking resemblance to me, and to Veronica, gazed down from ornate frames. In the center of the room sat an antique tea service on a low table, steam still rising from the pot as if it had just been prepared. "Please, sit," Veronica said, settling gracefully into a chair that looked like it had been made for her specifically. "There's so much you need to know, and I'm afraid we may not have as much time as I'd hoped." I perched on the edge of a velvet sofa, keeping one eye on Liam as he wandered the room, drawn to the portraits and the way sunlight streamed through windows that seemed to be in exactly the right places to create the most beautiful patterns on the floor. "Your mother was my niece," Veronica began, pouring tea that smelled like flowers and something indefinably magical. "Isabella was her name, and she was one of the most gifted members of our family in generations. She could heal with a touch, encourage plants to grow with just her presence, and she had an intuition about people and situations that was almost prophetic." My hand trembled slightly as I accepted the delicate china cup. "What happened to her? Why was I adopted?" Veronica's expression grew sad. "Isabella fell in love with a human man, your father. It happens sometimes, though it always comes with complications. They were happy for a time, but your father couldn't accept what Isabella was, what their child would be. The magic frightened him. When Isabella became pregnant, he tried to convince her to suppress her abilities, to live as a normal human family." The tea was warm and soothing, but I could barely taste it through the ache in my chest. "And she couldn't do that?" "She tried, for his sake and for yours. But suppressing our nature is like trying to hold back the tide, it builds pressure until something has to give. Isabella's magic became unstable during her pregnancy. She managed to carry you to term, but the strain of fighting her own nature." Veronica paused, her eyes distant with old pain. "She died in childbirth. Your father, devastated and afraid, arranged for your adoption before I could even find out what had happened." I set down my teacup with shaking hands. "So she died because she tried to be normal? Because she tried to be human?" "She died because she loved someone who couldn't love all of her," Veronica said gently. "It's a lesson our family has learned many times, though we don't always heed it." Across the room, Liam had discovered a crystal sphere on one of the bookshelves. As he touched it, the crystal began to glow with a soft, pulsing light that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. "What are we exactly?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would change everything. "We are Fae," Veronica said simply. "An old bloodline that traces back to the courts of the ancient world. Not the tiny winged creatures of children's stories, but beings of power and magic who have always lived alongside humanity, though usually hidden from them." The words settled into my bones like a key turning in a lock. Fae. It explained the strange dreams I'd been having, the way plants seemed to respond to my moods, the increasing intensity of my intuition about people and situations. "Our powers typically manifest fully when we reach our 25th year," Veronica continued. It's why you've been feeling different lately, why things that were always subtle are becoming impossible to ignore. Your magic is awakening, Tanya, just as it awakened in your mother, and her mother before her. I looked at Liam, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor with the glowing crystal in his lap, completely absorbed in the way it pulsed with warm light. And Liam? Veronica's expression grew serious. Liam is something extraordinary. Half fae, half werewolf. I've never encountered such a combination before. Wait, what? I shot to my feet so quickly that my teacup clattered to the floor. What did you just say? Tanya, please sit down. Let me explain. Half werewolf? My voice came out higher than I intended, panic making my chest tight. I moved protectively toward Liam, who looked up at me with wide, concerned eyes. What do you mean werewolf? How could you possibly know anything about his father? Veronica remained calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I can sense his dual nature, Tanya. The fae magic from your bloodline, yes, but also something wild, something that speaks of the pack. His scent carries both signatures. His scent. I knelt beside Liam, my hands automatically checking him over as if I could somehow protect him from this revelation. Are you telling me that Nicholas? I stopped, my throat closing around the name I hadn't spoken in 3 years. The man you were with that night. Yes, he was werewolf. And a powerful one, from what I can sense in Liam. My hands were shaking as I gathered Liam closer to me. Is he in danger? Are there others who can sense what he is? Is someone going to try to take him from me? Mama? Liam's small voice cut through my panic. Why are you scared? I forced myself to take a deep breath, smoothing his dark hair. Mama's just processing some new information, sweetheart. Veronica leaned forward, her voice gentle but urgent. Tanya, I need you to listen to me. Yes, both communities, ours and the werewolf packs, will be very interested in Liam when they learn of his existence. A child with both bloodlines is unprecedented. But that's exactly why you need to understand your own power, why you need to be prepared. Prepared for what? The words came out sharper than I intended. Are you saying people are going to come after my son? I'm saying that knowledge is power, and right now, you're operating blind. Your fae abilities are awakening whether you acknowledge them or not. Liam's dual nature is developing whether you understand it or not. Wouldn't you rather be prepared? A surge of fierce, protective energy flowed through me, and every flower in the room suddenly burst into fuller bloom. The air filled with their fragrance, and I stared in shock at what I'd just done. Mama, did you see? The light feels warm, like when you hug me. Liam held up the crystal, which was now pulsing with a warm, gentle light that seemed to respond to his heartbeat. When I reached out to touch it, the light grew brighter, and I felt a sense of recognition so deep it made my chest tight with emotion, like coming home after a very long journey. This is what I mean, Veronica said softly, watching as the light from the crystal seemed to dance between my fingers and Liam's. You're already protecting him with your magic, Tanya. But imagine how much more you could do if you understood how to control it. I looked around the room, at the flowers I'd somehow enhanced, at the portraits of women who looked like me, at the crystal responding to both my touch and my son's. For the first time since Liam was born, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere, like I finally understood why I'd always felt different, why I never quite fit into the normal world. But more than that, I felt the stirring of a power I'd never imagined I possessed. If there were people who might try to use or harm my son because of what he was, then I needed to be strong enough to stop them. Tell me everything, I said, settling back onto the sofa with Liam in my lap. I need to know what we're dealing with. Veronica smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked truly relaxed. Now you're beginning to sound like your mother. Isabella would have said exactly the same thing. As she began to speak about bloodlines and abilities, about the delicate balance between the supernatural communities, I felt the last pieces of my old life falling away. Tanya Morrison, the woman who tried so hard to be normal, to be perfect, to fit into someone else's idea of who she should be, was disappearing. In her place was someone I was only beginning to understand. Someone with power running through her veins, someone with a son whose very existence might reshape the supernatural world, and someone who would do whatever it took to protect the family she was finally learning to claim. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I felt the very land itself welcoming us home. 2 days after my revelation at Silverbrook Manor, I found myself back in the familiar rhythm of small-town life, though everything felt different now. The knowledge of what I was, what Liam was, sat like a weight in my chest, both terrifying and oddly comforting. I understood now why I'd never quite fit anywhere before. My parents had been patient with my vague explanations about learning family history, though I caught my mother watching me with curious eyes as I unconsciously coaxed her houseplants into more vibrant blooms. Liam, meanwhile, seemed more settled than he'd been since we'd arrived, as if finally understanding his own nature had given him permission to just be himself. It was Thursday morning when I decided we needed groceries. Normal, mundane groceries, because even newly awakened Faye still needed to eat, and my 3-year-old son had very definite opinions about which cereal was acceptable. "Mama, can we get the ones with the berries?" Liam asked from his perch in the shopping cart, his legs swinging as we navigated the produce section. "The ones that turn the milk purple?" I stopped mid-sentence, my entire body going still. There was a scent in the air, something wild and clean and masculine that made every nerve ending come alive. My face senses, still new and unpredictable, were suddenly on high alert. Liam's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring slightly in that way that had become more pronounced since our visit to Veronica's. "Mama," he whispered, his voice carrying an odd urgency. "Mama, someone's." That's when I saw him. Nicholas stood 3 aisles over in the cereal section, his back to us, but I would have recognized those broad shoulders anywhere. He was taller than I remembered, his dark hair perfectly styled, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, from his Italian leather shoes to the way he carried himself with absolute confidence. But it was the way he went utterly still that made my breath catch. His entire body tensed, and I watched as his head tilted slightly, scenting the air. When he turned, his eyes, those same dark eyes that had haunted my dreams for 3 years, swept the store with predatory focus until they locked on mine. The recognition was instant and electric. But it was the way his gaze immediately dropped to Liam, the way his pupils dilated and his nostrils flared, that made my protective instincts surge. He could smell his son. He knew. Nicholas took a step forward, then another, moving with that fluid grace I remembered, but there was something different now. Purpose. Intent. His eyes never left Liam's face, and I could see the moment recognition dawned fully, the shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the dark hair that was exactly the same shade as his own. "Mama?" Liam's small hand gripped my arm. "Mama, why do I feel funny?" "Because you're meeting your father for the first time," I thought, but what I said was, "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's okay." Nicholas was close enough now that I could see the emotion flickering across his features, shock, wonder, something that might have been pain. When he spoke, his voice was rough with barely controlled emotion. "Tanya." "Nicholas." My voice came out steadier than I felt. 3 years of building strength, of learning to stand on my own, had not prepared me for this moment. He was just as devastatingly attractive as I remembered, but there was something more now, an aura of power that hadn't been there before, or perhaps I simply hadn't been able to sense it. His attention shifted to Liam, and his expression softened in a way that made my chest tight. "And this must be Liam," I said quietly. "Liam Nicholas Morrison." Something flashed in his eyes at the middle name, surprise, gratitude, something deeper I couldn't identify. "Liam," he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "How old?" 3. I saw no point in lying, not when he could probably scent the truth anyway. Not when Liam was looking at him with the kind of intense focus that meant his werewolf instincts were kicking in. Nicholas crouched down slowly, bringing himself to Liam's eye level, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Hello, Liam." "Hi," Liam said softly, then with that directness that only small children possessed, "You smell like me. But different." I watched Nicholas's breath catch, watched his hands clench and unclench at his sides as if he was fighting the urge to reach out and touch his son. "Different how?" Liam tilted his head, considering. Like woods and wind and. He scrunched up his nose, thinking. "Like pack, but I don't know what that means." "Jesus," Nicholas breathed, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. When he looked up at me, his eyes were intense, almost desperate. "We need to talk. All of us. There are things." "Tanya? Tanya Morrison, is that really you?" The voice came from behind me, and I felt my newfound confidence crack slightly. I turned to see David pushing a cart toward us, his blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing the kind of casual expensive clothes that said he was doing well for himself. Behind him, Sarah emerged from the pharmacy section, a prescription bag in her hand and surprise written all over her face. Of all the timing. David. I straightened my shoulders, drawing on the strength I'd found in Portland, in single motherhood, in discovering what I truly was. "Sarah. My God, you look." David's eyes swept over me, taking in my confident posture, my designer jeans, a gift from my Portland life, the way I carried myself now. "You look incredible." Sarah was staring at Liam with wide eyes. "Is this? Do you have a child?" "This is my son, Liam." I kept my voice neutral, but I could feel the protective energy humming beneath my skin. Next to me, Nicholas had risen to his full height, and the territorial tension rolling off him was almost palpable. David's eyes shifted to Nicholas, taking in the expensive suit, the obvious wealth, the way he stood slightly closer to me and Liam than strictly necessary. "And this is?" "Nicholas," I said simply, not offering any further explanation. "Right." David's smile was strained now. "Well, this is unexpected. We heard you'd moved to Oregon." "Portland," I confirmed. "We're just visiting family." Sarah stepped forward, and I could see her trying to recapture some of our old friendship dynamic. "Tanya, I've been thinking about you so much lately." "About what happened?" I wanted to call, to explain. "There's nothing to explain," I said calmly, and meant it. The old pain was still there, but it felt distant now, like looking at a bruise that had long since healed. "You both made your choices. I made mine. But if we could just talk, maybe clear the air." David started, but he trailed off as Nicholas moved fractionally closer to me. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable, a predator marking territory. "I don't think that's necessary," Nicholas said, his voice carrying an authority that made both David and Sarah step back unconsciously. "Tanya seems perfectly clear on where she stands." The alpha power radiating from him was almost overwhelming now, and I realized he was barely holding back his protective instincts. In his mind, these people had hurt his mate. I could feel something stirring in my chest, a recognition that went deeper than memory. The way my fey magic responded to his presence, the way every instinct I had was telling me he was mine to protect and be protected by. "Mate." The word whispered through my mind unbidden, and from the way Nicholas's pupils dilated as he looked at me, I suspected he was having the same realization, and they were now in proximity to his cub. "Mama," Liam said quietly, tugging on my shirt. "Can we go now? That lady smells like sad, and that man smells like lies. Out of the mouths of babes. Or wolf cubs, apparently." David and Sarah both looked taken aback by Liam's blunt assessment, but I just smiled and ruffled his hair. "Of course, sweetheart." I looked at David and Sarah one more time, these people who had once meant everything to me, and felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just a mild curiosity about why I'd ever thought their opinions mattered. Take care of yourselves, I said, and I genuinely meant it. Then I turned to Nicholas. Walk with us. He nodded, falling into step beside me as I pushed the cart toward the checkout lanes. Behind us, I could hear David and Sarah murmuring to each other, probably trying to figure out what had just happened. That was... Nicholas began once we were out of earshot. Overdue, I finished. I should have faced them years ago, but I wasn't ready then. I wasn't strong enough. And now? I considered the question as we joined the checkout line. Now I know who I am. What I am. And I know that their betrayal, as much as it hurt at the time, led me to exactly where I needed to be. Nicholas was quiet for a moment, processing. Portland. You said you lived in Portland. For 3 years. Built a good life there. I glanced at him sideways. What about you? You're still the same man I met at that bar, aren't you? Still the successful businessman? A wry smile tugged at his lips. Still an alpha, still running the companies, yes. Though I'll admit, finding out I have a son changes priorities. You were already alpha when we met, I said, remembering now the confidence he'd carried, the way other people had deferred to him even in that crowded bar. I should have realized. You had other things on your mind that night, he said gently. We both did. I felt heat creep up my neck at the memory. Your pack, do they know about Liam? Not yet, Nicholas said quietly. But they will soon. News like this doesn't stay secret long in our world. An alpha. A billionaire alpha who owned multiple companies and was apparently some kind of businessman. The man I'd had a one-night stand with, the father of my son, wasn't just powerful, he was probably one of the most influential wolf shifters in the country. And Liam? I asked as we reached the front of the line. Nicholas's expression grew serious. Liam changes everything, Tanya. A child with both bloodlines, there are factions in both our communities that would see him as either a threat to be eliminated or a weapon to be controlled. The protective surge of energy that flowed through me at his words was so strong that every flower in the store's floral department suddenly burst into fuller bloom. The checkout clerk blinked in confusion at the sudden wave of fragrance, but didn't seem to connect it to me. Let them try, I said softly, but there was steel in my voice. Nicholas inhaled deeply, his eyes closing for a moment before opening with an intensity that made me step back. I can scent it on you now. The magic. It's different from before, stronger, awakened. His voice was rough. Faye. You can tell? I asked, surprised. Your scent has changed completely since that night 3 years ago. Back then you smelled human, with just something indefinable that drew me in. Now. He shook his head in wonder. Now you smell like wildflowers and lightning storms and something ancient I can't even name. I felt my cheeks flush. I just found out a few days ago. Apparently it runs in the family. He stopped walking entirely. Faye. Jesus, Tanya, do you have any idea what this means? What Liam is? A 3-year-old boy who needs his mother to protect him, I said firmly. Everything else is secondary. Nicholas stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him reassessing everything he thought he knew about this situation. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with something that sounded like awe. You really have no idea how powerful you are, do you? Before I could answer, Liam tugged on both our hands. Mama, nice man, can we go get ice cream? All this talking is making me hungry, and the sad lady and lying man made the air taste funny. I looked down at my son, our son, and then at Nicholas, who was watching Liam with such fierce protectiveness and love that it made my chest ache. Ice cream sounds perfect, I said. But we have a lot to discuss. Nicholas nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. Yes, we do. Starting with how I'm going to keep both of you safe. The possessiveness in his voice should have annoyed me. 3 years ago, it would have. But now, with my Fae powers humming beneath my skin and the knowledge of exactly how dangerous our world had become, it felt like a promise. And for the first time since learning about the supernatural communities that would be interested in my son, I didn't feel like I was facing the threat alone. Want to know how the story ends? Stay tuned for the second episode. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and allowing Fated Hearts to be part of your day. There's something magical about sharing these romantic journeys together, and I hope Tanya's strength, Nicholas's devotion, and little Liam's precious spirit touched your heart as much as they touched mine. If this audiobook swept you away, please show your love by hitting that like button. It truly helps other romance lovers discover these stories. I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? Did you love Tanya's fierce independence? Were you rooting for Nicholas from the start? And what did you think of that jealous she-wolf drama? Don't forget to subscribe to Fated Hearts and turn on notifications because I have so many more enchanting paranormal romances coming your way. From vampire kings to dragon shifters, from witch covens to angel guardians, there's a whole supernatural world of love stories waiting for us to explore together. Speaking of future audiobooks, I want to hear from you. What supernatural romance would you like to experience next? Drop your requests in the comments, and let's build our Fated Hearts community together. Whether you're Team Vampire, Team Shifter, or Team Fae, there's room for everyone in our romantic family. Follow Fated Hearts on social media for behind-the-scenes content, character art, and sneak peeks of upcoming audiobooks. Links are in the description below. Until our next romantic adventure, remember, love is patient, love is kind, and sometimes, love is supernatural. Sweet dreams, and may your own fated heart find its perfect match. This has been Fated Hearts. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.